My MIL threw out my wife's birth control. It's time for baby number 2. I found the empty pill pack in the kitchen trash on a Thursday evening while taking out the garbage. 28 pills, every single one popped from the foil backing and presumably flushed down our toilet. My mother-in-law Linda was standing at our kitchen counter arranging flowers she'd brought over, humming something cheerful like she hadn't just committed a felony. When I held up the empty pack and asked what the hell happened, she turned to me with this serene smile and said it was time for us to give our daughter Maya a little sibling. She said it the way someone might suggest ordering pizza for dinner, not like she'd just sabotaged my wife's reproductive autonomy and violated about 15 different laws. I'd been married to my wife Olivia for 7 years when this happened, and we'd been dealing with Linda's boundary violations for every single one of those years, plus the 3 we dated before that. She'd shown up uninvited to our apartment the morning after our wedding night because she wanted to make us breakfast. She'd rearranged our entire kitchen during our honeymoon because our organization system was inefficient. She'd announced Olivia's pregnancy to her entire book club before we'd even told my parents. Every incident followed the same script. Linda would overstep massively, we'd push back, she'd cry and play the victim card, and Olivia would eventually cave to keep family peace because that's what 32 years of Linda's parenting had trained her to do. But this crossed a line so far beyond previous violations that I couldn't even see the line anymore. Olivia was upstairs giving Maya a bath when I discovered the pills. Our 3-year-old daughter was the light of our world, but her birth had been complicated. Emergency C-section at 36 weeks, Olivia hemorrhaged, spent 2 days in ICU, developed severe postpartum depression that lasted nearly 18 months. We'd both agreed we wanted Maya to be older before we even considered another child, if we had another at all. Olivia had started birth control again when Maya turned 2, and it had been a huge part of her feeling like she had control over her own body and future again. And now, Linda had taken that control away, with the same casual authority she used when she reorganized our pantry without asking. I stood there in our kitchen, the empty pill pack in one hand, my other hand gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. Linda dried her hands on our dish towel like she'd just finished some normal household chore. I asked her again what she'd done, needing to hear her say it out loud, needing confirmation that this was real. She explained in this patient, condescending voice that she'd found Olivia's pills in the bathroom cabinet that morning when she was looking for Band-Aids. She said she'd been thinking about it all day and decided it was time for us to expand our family. She said Maya needed a sibling close in age, that Olivia was already 34 and shouldn't wait much longer, that Linda knew what was best because she'd raised 2 daughters successfully. She actually emphasized the word successfully, like her younger daughter wasn't currently in therapy 3 times a week trying to unpack all the damage Linda had caused. I told Linda she had absolutely no right to touch Olivia's medication, that what she'd done was illegal and dangerous. She waved her hand dismissively and said birth control was just hormones anyway, that stopping for a while wouldn't hurt Olivia. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, that hot rushing sensation that happens when you're so angry you can barely form coherent words. I told her she needed to leave our house immediately. Linda's face crumpled into that wounded expression she always deployed when she didn't get her way. She said she was just trying to help our family, trying to give Maya the gift of a sibling. I raised my voice and told her we hadn't asked for her help, and that she'd violated our trust in a way that couldn't be undone. Olivia appeared in the doorway holding Maya wrapped in a towel, asking what all the shouting was about. I showed her the empty pill pack, and I watched every drop of color drain from her face as she understood what her mother had done. The first thing Olivia did after getting Maya into pajamas was check the bathroom cabinet to see if Linda had only taken the current month or all of them. The cabinet was empty. 3 months' worth of birth control pills, prescribed by her doctor and paid for by our insurance, completely gone. Olivia stood there staring at the empty shelf where the pills should have been, and her hands started trembling. She turned to her mother and asked in this very quiet, very controlled voice why she would do something like this. Linda launched into the same explanation she'd given me about Maya needing a sibling and Olivia's biological clock and how Linda had raised her girls close together and it had been wonderful. Olivia cut her off mid-sentence and told her to get out of our house. Linda's eyes filled with tears. She said she couldn't believe her own daughter was throwing her out over something so minor. Olivia's voice got louder then. She said this wasn't minor, that Linda had destroyed her prescription medication without permission, and she needed to leave before Olivia called the police. Linda looked at me like she expected me to intervene, to tell Olivia she was overreacting. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the emergency dial screen. I asked Linda if she wanted to leave on her own or wait for the cops to escort her out. She grabbed her purse from the counter and said we were being ridiculous, that we'd regret treating family this way, that she was only trying to help us see what was best for our family. She said Olivia had always been too emotional and that I'd made it worse by enabling her instead of being the rational one. She was still talking as I walked her to the front door, saying we'd come crawling back when we realized she was right. I locked the door behind her and turned to find Olivia sitting on the stairs crying. Not quiet tears, but full-body sobs that shook her shoulders. Maya started crying too, because she'd never seen her mother that upset before. I got Maya settled in bed with extra stories and her favorite stuffed elephant while trying to explain in 3-year-old terms that Grandma Linda had made a mistake and Mommy was sad, but everything would be okay. Maya asked if Grandma was in timeout like she got when she did something wrong. I said yes, Grandma was in timeout, which seemed to satisfy her enough that she fell asleep. When I came back downstairs, Olivia was in our bedroom sitting on the floor with her back against the bed, still crying. I sat next to her, and she told me she felt violated, that her mother had been in our bathroom going through our private things and had made a unilateral decision about Olivia's body without her consent. She said she felt stupid for trusting her mother enough to give her a key to our house. She said she should have known better after everything Linda had done over the years. I called our insurance company first thing the next morning to see about getting an emergency refill. The representative told me we'd picked up a 90-day supply just 2 weeks ago, and they couldn't authorize another refill for 3 months unless Olivia's doctor submitted special override paperwork. I explained that someone had destroyed the medication. The representative said that qualified as personal loss and wasn't covered by insurance, but we could pay out of pocket for a replacement. She quoted me $218 for 3 months of pills. I said I'd call back and hung up, furious that we had to pay over $200 because of Linda's interference. Olivia had an appointment with her OB/GYN scheduled for the following week anyway, so I called Dr. Amanda Kirkland's office and explained the situation to the nurse. She put me on hold, came back 3 minutes later, and said Dr. Kirkland could fit Olivia in that afternoon at 3:45 if it was urgent. Dr. Amanda Kirkland had been Olivia's doctor for 9 years, since before we got married. She'd delivered Maya via emergency C-section and had helped Olivia through the postpartum depression with expertise and genuine compassion. When we arrived at her office that afternoon, the receptionist took us straight back to an exam room. Dr. Kirkland came in within minutes and asked Olivia to explain what happened. Olivia told her everything, starting with how we'd given Linda a house key for emergencies, how Linda had been at our house for about 5 hours that day, and how I'd found the empty pill pack in our kitchen trash that evening. Dr. Kirkland's expression grew increasingly concerned as Olivia talked. She asked if Linda had said why she did it, and Olivia explained the whole speech about it being time for another baby and Maya needing a sibling. Dr. Kirkland said what Linda had done was not only completely inappropriate, but potentially criminal, that intentionally destroying someone's prescription medication could constitute theft, destruction of property, or even assault. She asked Olivia how she was feeling emotionally about the situation. Olivia started crying again and said she felt like her bodily autonomy had been stolen, that she'd fought so hard to recover from postpartum depression and regain a sense of control over her own life, and now her mother had ripped that control away without her consent. Dr. Kirkland nodded and made detailed notes in Olivia's file. She said she wanted to document this incident officially as medication tampering by a third party. She asked if we'd considered filing a police report, and I said we hadn't really thought about it yet, but we're starting to consider it. Dr. Kirkland wrote Olivia a new prescription for 3 months of birth control and coded it in the system in a way that would make insurance cover the emergency replacement. She said she'd documented in Olivia's medical records that the original prescription had been deliberately destroyed by another person, and this refill was medically necessary. She also asked if Olivia wanted a referral back to her psychiatrist to process what had happened. Olivia said she'd already texted her therapist asking for an emergency session. Dr. Kirkland told Olivia she was doing all the right things by seeking support and setting firm boundaries with her mother. She printed out a formal letter that outlined what had happened and her professional medical opinion that the destruction of Olivia's medication was harmful and potentially dangerous to her mental health. She said if we decided to pursue legal action or file a police report, this documentation would be crucial evidence. We left her office with the new prescription and the documentation letter, and I took Olivia straight to the pharmacy to fill it. She was quiet during the drive, staring out the window at nothing. I asked if she was okay, and she said no, she wasn't okay at all, but she would be eventually. She said she needed to make a decision about what to do about her mother because this pattern couldn't continue. Linda started texting both of us that evening. The first message said she'd been thinking and praying about what happened and still believed she'd done the right thing for our family. The second message said families were supposed to forgive each other and she hoped we'd calm down and see reason soon. The third message said she'd talked to her pastor about the situation and he'd agreed that honoring and respecting family elders was biblically important. I showed the text to Olivia and she stared at them for a long time before responding. She texted back that Linda had committed a crime by destroying her prescription medication and wouldn't be welcome in our house or around Maya until she took full accountability for what she'd done. Linda responded immediately saying Olivia was being dramatic and hurtful, that she'd never done anything but love and support us, and this was how we repaid her. Olivia blocked her mother's number after reading that message. Linda's husband, Frank, called my phone around 8:30 that evening. I let it go to voicemail initially, but he called back immediately, then a third time. I answered on the fourth ring. Frank said Linda was devastated and had been crying all day. He said she'd only been trying to help us grow our family, and we were being unreasonably harsh with her. I told Frank that Linda had destroyed Olivia's prescription medication without permission, and what she did was potentially illegal. Frank said birth control pills weren't real medication, they were just hormones, and we were making way too big a deal out of it. I asked him if he'd be fine with someone flushing his blood pressure medication down the toilet because they decided he didn't need it. He went quiet for a moment, then said that was different because blood pressure medication was actually medically necessary. I told him Olivia's birth control was medically necessary for her mental and physical health, that suddenly stopping it could cause serious problems, and neither he nor Linda had any right whatsoever to make medical decisions for Olivia. Frank said Linda had raised 2 daughters and knew what she was talking about when it came to family planning. I reminded him that I'd known his younger daughter Rachel since high school and was well aware of how Linda's parenting had affected her, that Rachel was still dealing with the psychological damage in therapy. Frank got defensive and said we were dredging up old issues that had nothing to do with this situation. I said everything had to do with this situation because it was about Linda's long-standing pattern of controlling behavior and her complete refusal to respect boundaries. Frank said I was turning his daughter against her own mother and that our marriage wouldn't survive this kind of division. I told him our marriage was fine, that Olivia and I were completely united on this, and the only division was the one Linda had created by violating our trust. He hung up on me without another word. Olivia's therapist, Dr. Simone Laurent, had a cancellation and could see her the next afternoon. Dr. Laurent had been working with Olivia for 6 years, ever since the postpartum depression started. She specialized in maternal mental health and family trauma, with 18 years of clinical experience. When Olivia sat down in her office and explained what Linda had done, Dr. Laurent's reaction was immediate and visceral. She said what happened was a fundamental violation of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights, that it could potentially trigger Olivia's depression symptoms to resurface, and it represented a dangerous pattern of enmeshment and control that needed to be addressed immediately. She asked how Olivia was feeling, and Olivia said she felt angry, violated, sad, and guilty all at the same time. Guilty because part of her felt like she should just forgive her mother and move on like she'd always done before with Linda's boundary violations. Dr. Laurent said that guilt was a trained response from 30-plus years of being conditioned to prioritize Linda's feelings over her own well-being. She said what Linda did wasn't just crossing a boundary, it was obliterating it entirely. She explained that destroying someone's birth control could lead to an unplanned pregnancy, which in Olivia's case could potentially trigger another severe postpartum depression episode that might be even worse than the first. She said that meant Linda's actions weren't just controlling and inappropriate, they were genuinely dangerous to Olivia's mental health and potentially her life. Dr. Laurent asked what Olivia wanted to do going forward. Olivia said honestly she didn't know. Part of her wanted to never speak to her mother again. Part of her felt obligated to maintain the relationship because that's what good daughters did. Dr. Laurent said there was a third option, which was setting extremely firm boundaries with serious consequences and seeing if Linda could actually respect them. We spent that entire weekend discussing what our boundaries would look like and what consequences we were genuinely willing to enforce. Olivia said she needed her mother to acknowledge what she'd done was wrong, apologize genuinely without excuses or justifications, and commit to respecting our autonomy and our decisions going forward. I said, I thought we should also require supervised visits, only for the foreseeable future, because we couldn't trust Linda alone in our house or alone with Maya after this violation. Olivia agreed completely. We drafted a detailed letter outlining our requirements, a genuine apology that acknowledged the medication destruction was wrong and harmful, agreement to attend family therapy sessions with us and a neutral therapist, no unsupervised visits with Maya for at least 6 months, and immediate departure from our home if we asked her to leave during any visit. We stated clearly that if she couldn't meet these requirements, she wouldn't have access to us or to Maya at all. The letter was firm and clear, but not intentionally cruel. We wanted Linda to understand we were completely serious without giving her ammunition to paint us as vindictive or unreasonable. We sent the letter via email with a read receipt on Sunday evening around 7. Linda opened it within 4 minutes. 8 minutes later, my phone started ringing. It was Linda calling from Frank's phone since Olivia had blocked her number. I answered and put it on speaker so Olivia could hear. Linda was crying hysterically, saying we'd sent her the most hurtful, horrible letter she'd ever received in her entire life. She said she couldn't believe her own daughter would make her beg for forgiveness over trying to help their family. Frank was in the background telling her to calm down and breathe. Linda ignored him and kept talking, saying she'd sacrificed everything for her children, and this was how Olivia repaid her, by cutting her off from her only grandchild. She said requiring supervised visits was treating her like a criminal, and she'd never agree to such humiliating terms. Olivia took the phone from me and told her mother very calmly that those were our non-negotiable terms, and if she couldn't accept them, she wouldn't be part of our lives anymore. Linda's voice shifted instantly from crying to ice cold. She said, if that's how we wanted things, fine. She said she'd tell everyone in the family what we were doing to her, how we were keeping her precious granddaughter away from her because she cared too much about our family's well-being. She said we'd regret this decision when Maya grew up asking why she didn't have a relationship with her grandmother. Olivia's voice stayed steady and calm. She told her mother she was sorry Linda felt that way, but our boundaries weren't up for negotiation or discussion. She said if Linda wanted to maintain any relationship with us and Maya, she knew exactly what she needed to do. Linda said she would never apologize for wanting more grandchildren and hung up abruptly. Olivia sat there staring at the phone with tears running down her face. She said she'd known that would probably be her mother's response, but had hoped desperately she might be wrong. I held her while she cried and told her we'd get through this together, that we'd done the right thing. The next few days brought an absolute flood of messages from Olivia's extended family. Her sister Rachel called saying Linda was having a complete breakdown over being cut off from Maya. She said we were being cruel and that families were supposed to forgive each other no matter what. I asked Rachel if she knew the full story of what actually happened, and she said Linda had told her we were punishing her for simply suggesting we have another baby. I explained in detail that Linda hadn't just suggested anything. She'd actively and deliberately destroyed Olivia's prescription medication. Rachel went completely quiet for a long moment, then said Linda hadn't mentioned that specific detail. I told her to ask her mother to tell her the complete truth before making any judgments about our response. Rachel said she'd talk to Linda directly and hung up. Olivia's Aunt Patricia sent a lengthy text message about how cutting grandparents off from grandchildren was a form of emotional abuse, and we should be ashamed of ourselves. Olivia deleted the message without responding. Linda's pastor, Reverend Thomas Bellamy, called our house phone on Wednesday evening around 6. He introduced himself politely and said Linda had come to him very upset about a serious family conflict and had asked him to mediate between us. I told him we appreciated his concern, but this was really a private matter between us and Linda. He said he understood completely, but he'd known Linda for over 15 years, and she was a devoted mother and grandmother who clearly loved her family deeply. I said I didn't doubt at all that Linda loved us in her own way, but love didn't excuse violating boundaries or destroying property. Reverend Bellamy asked what exactly had happened to cause such a serious rift, and I explained in detail about the birth control pills. There was a very long pause on the line. When he spoke again, his tone had changed significantly. He said Linda had told him we'd gotten extremely angry at her for suggesting we should have more children, but she definitely hadn't mentioned anything about destroying medication. I asked Reverend Bellamy if he'd be willing to help facilitate a conversation where Linda took actual accountability for her specific actions. He said he would absolutely try, but he couldn't make any promises about how Linda would respond or whether she'd be receptive. He said he'd have a direct conversation with her about what she'd actually done versus what she'd told him and see if she was genuinely willing to acknowledge the difference and take responsibility. I thanked him sincerely and said we'd be open to mediation if Linda was truly willing to be honest and accountable. He said he'd be in touch within a few days and ended the call. Olivia asked if I really thought her mother would suddenly start being honest with her pastor of 15 years, and I said probably not, but it was worth seeing if someone from her church community could get through to her in ways we apparently couldn't. Olivia said she wasn't holding her breath waiting for that miracle. We heard absolutely nothing from Linda or her side of the family for over a week. The silence felt strange and uncomfortable after the constant bombardment of messages and calls. Then Rachel called Olivia directly and asked if they could meet for coffee somewhere neutral. Olivia agreed cautiously, and they met at a cafe near Rachel's apartment. Rachel admitted that she'd confronted their mother directly about the medication destruction. Linda had initially denied doing it, then minimized it as not a big deal, then finally admitted she'd thrown away the pills, but insisted she'd done it for the right reasons and with good intentions. Rachel said she'd been genuinely shocked because Linda had completely lied to her, and apparently to the rest of the family about what actually happened. She apologized to Olivia for taking their mother's side without knowing the full story first. She said what Linda did was absolutely inexcusable, and she supported whatever boundaries Olivia needed to set for her own well-being and safety. Rachel said she'd tried multiple times to talk to their mother about apologizing properly and going to therapy, but Linda had refused every time. Linda insisted she hadn't done anything wrong and wouldn't apologize for caring about her family and wanting what was best for them. Rachel said their mother was telling everyone who would listen that Olivia and I were punishing her unjustly and keeping Maya away out of spite, but Rachel had started correcting that narrative whenever she heard it repeated. She said some family members were starting to reconsider their initial positions once they knew the actual truth, but others were choosing to believe Linda's version because it was easier and more comfortable than acknowledging Linda had done something seriously wrong. Olivia asked about their younger cousin Austin, and Rachel said he was staying completely out of it, didn't want to get involved in any family drama whatsoever. That hurt Olivia because she and Austin had always been relatively close, but Rachel said he'd always been extremely conflict avoidant, and this situation probably felt too big and complicated for him to handle. Dr. Laurent strongly recommended we consult with a family law attorney to fully understand our legal options if Linda decided to escalate the situation further. She said grandparent rights cases were real things that actually happened in our state, and given Linda's established pattern of boundary violations and her complete refusal to respect our authority as parents, we needed to be prepared for that possibility. She referred us to Jennifer Lawson, a family law attorney with 22 years of experience, specifically handling custody disputes and grandparent rights cases. We met with Jennifer in her office downtown the following week. Her office was professional and calming, with law books lining 2 walls and framed degrees from Yale Law School prominently displayed. We explained the entire situation from the very beginning: Linda's long history of boundary violations, the medication destruction incident, our attempts to set reasonable boundaries, and Linda's absolute refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing whatsoever. Jennifer listened extremely carefully and took detailed notes throughout our explanation. When we finished talking, she said she'd handled several cases very similar to this one before. She explained that what Linda did by destroying prescription medication could technically be charged as theft, destruction of property, or potentially even assault if prosecutors could prove she intended to cause harm by forcing an unplanned pregnancy. She said we had strong documentation with Dr. Kirkland's medical records and formal letter. She said grandparent rights laws varied significantly by state, but in our state, Grandparents could only successfully petition for court-ordered visitation if they could prove that denying them access would cause direct harm to the child. Given that Maya was only 3 years old and had never had an extremely close or dependent relationship with Linda due to our previously established boundaries, it would be very difficult for Linda to meet that burden of proof. Jennifer said the medication destruction incident actually strengthened our position significantly because it demonstrated clearly that Linda couldn't be trusted to respect our parenting decisions or act in our family's best interests. Jennifer strongly recommended we document absolutely everything going forward. Every text message, every voicemail, every single interaction with Linda or her family members acting on her behalf. She said to keep a detailed log with specific dates, exact times, and thorough descriptions of what was said or done. She also recommended we seriously consider filing an official police report about the medication destruction, not necessarily because we wanted to press criminal charges, but to create an official record in case Linda ever tried to claim we were making false accusations or exaggerating what happened. She said having that police report on file could be absolutely crucial if Linda decided to petition for grandparent rights, or if the situation escalated in other concerning ways. We left her office feeling simultaneously more prepared and more anxious, with a clear action plan and the knowledge that we had solid legal options if we needed them. I filed an official police report that same afternoon at our local precinct. Officer Daniel Kowalski took my initial statement, and I could tell from his expression he was somewhat skeptical about whether this really qualified as a legitimate police matter. I showed him all the documentation from Dr. Kirkland, the actual empty pill packet I'd saved as evidence in a plastic bag, and the text messages where Linda had explicitly admitted to disposing of the pills. Officer Kowalski's entire expression changed dramatically as he reviewed everything carefully. He said destruction of prescription medication was definitely illegal and could absolutely be prosecuted under state law. He asked if we wanted to press formal criminal charges against Linda, and I said not at this specific time, but we wanted the incident officially documented and on record. He filed the complete report and gave me a case number for our records. He said if Linda contacted us or came to our property after being explicitly told not to, we should call the police immediately and reference this case number. Olivia's mental health started deteriorating noticeably about 3 weeks after the initial incident. She was having serious trouble sleeping, struggling with increasing anxiety throughout the day, and showing early warning signs of her depression starting to resurface. Dr. Laurent increased their therapy sessions to twice per week and strongly recommended Olivia see her psychiatrist to discuss whether medication adjustments might be needed. Dr. Kirkland referred Olivia to Dr. Philip Graves, a psychiatrist who specialized in reproductive mental health and postpartum mood disorders. Dr. Graves had 16 years of clinical experience and had published peer-reviewed research on the connection between reproductive autonomy and mental health outcomes. When Olivia met with him and explained what Linda had done, Dr. Graves said this was precisely the kind of violation that could trigger severe trauma responses and depressive symptoms in people with a documented history of postpartum depression. He said the sudden loss of control over one's own reproductive choices could be profoundly destabilizing, especially for someone who'd worked so hard to regain that sense of control. Dr. Graves adjusted Olivia's antidepressant dosage upward and prescribed a short-term anti-anxiety medication to help her sleep at night. He also wrote an extremely detailed letter documenting how Linda's actions had directly and significantly impacted Olivia's mental health, triggering anxiety and depressive symptoms that required immediate medical intervention and ongoing treatment. He said this letter could be used as evidence if we ever needed to demonstrate in court the actual harm Linda's behavior had caused. Between Dr. Kirkland, Dr. Laurent, and Dr. Graves, we now had 3 separate medical professionals with impressive credentials documenting that what Linda did was genuinely harmful and had caused real, measurable damage to Olivia's well-being and health. That documentation felt critically important, like we had concrete proof that we weren't just overreacting or being dramatic like Linda kept claiming to anyone who would listen. Linda showed up unannounced at Maya's preschool exactly 4 weeks after the medication incident. The school director, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, called me immediately because I'd specifically told her when we enrolled Maya that Linda was absolutely not authorized to pick up Maya under any circumstances whatsoever. Mrs. Whitman said Linda had arrived around 2 in the afternoon, claiming she was there to surprise Maya and take her out for ice cream and a special grandmother-granddaughter afternoon. When Mrs. Whitman checked the authorized pickup list and didn't see Linda's name anywhere, she'd politely but firmly asked Linda to wait in the office while she contacted us to verify. Linda had gotten visibly upset and said she was Maya's grandmother and didn't need special permission to see her own granddaughter. Mrs. Whitman had calmly explained that she absolutely did need to be on our pre-approved authorized list and that school policy was completely non-negotiable for any reason. Linda had left crying and muttering about how we'd turned everyone against her, and Mrs. Whitman wanted to make absolutely sure we knew what had happened. I called Officer Kowalski immediately and told him about the preschool incident. He pulled up our case file in the system and said this could potentially constitute attempted custodial interference depending on Linda's specific intent. He asked if we had any written communication explicitly telling Linda to stay away from Maya, and I said we'd sent the detailed email outlining our boundaries, which included no unsupervised contact whatsoever. He said that might not be legally specific enough to enforce as a direct order, but combined with the previous medication incident, it definitely showed a clear pattern of Linda refusing to respect our authority as Maya's parents. He strongly recommended we have our attorney send Linda a formal cease and desist letter explicitly stating she was prohibited from contacting us, coming to our property, or attempting to see Maya without our express written permission. He said if she violated that formal letter, we'd have clear and unambiguous grounds for requesting a restraining order. Jennifer Lawson drafted the cease and desist letter that same evening and had it ready by the next morning. It was formal and legal in tone, stating clearly that Linda was prohibited from contacting Olivia or me directly through any means, from coming to our home or our workplaces, from attempting to contact or see Maya without our explicit written permission granted in advance, and from sending other people to contact us on her behalf. The letter stated unambiguously that any violation of these terms would result in immediate legal action, including filing for a restraining order and potentially pursuing criminal charges. Jennifer arranged to have it delivered via certified mail, so we'd have documented proof that Linda received it and signed for it. Linda signed for the letter on a Friday afternoon. Within 90 minutes of the delivery confirmation hitting our email, my phone started ringing constantly with calls from Frank, from Linda's sister, from people I barely even knew. I didn't answer a single one. The voicemails all had essentially the same theme. We were being incredibly cruel. We were destroying their family. We'd regret this someday. The stress of the entire situation was affecting me too, though I'd been so focused on supporting Olivia that I hadn't really processed my own feelings about it all. I started having serious trouble concentrating at work, snapping at colleagues over minor issues, lying awake at night worrying obsessively about what Linda might do next. My supervisor, David Brennan, pulled me aside after I'd had a visible meltdown during a team meeting and asked directly if everything was okay at home. I gave him a brief overview of what was happening with my mother-in-law, and he immediately told me to take whatever time I needed and not to worry about work. He said family crises were exactly what our employee assistance program existed for and gave me the contact information for the company's confidential counseling service. I scheduled an appointment with one of their therapists, Dr. Marcus Chen, who specialized in stress management and family conflict resolution. Talking to him helped me realize I'd been suppressing my own very legitimate anger and fear about the situation in order to be strong for Olivia. 6 weeks after the original medication incident, the situation escalated dramatically and terrifyingly. Olivia, Maya, and I had gone to a local park on Saturday morning to enjoy the unusually nice weather. We were watching Maya play on the swings when I noticed Linda standing near the parking lot with her phone out, clearly taking pictures or video of Maya from a distance. My blood ran completely cold. I told Olivia to stay with Maya while I walked over to confront Linda. She saw me coming and didn't even try to run or hide. She said very calmly that she had every legal right to take pictures of her granddaughter in a public park. I told her she was directly violating the cease and desist letter and needed to leave immediately before I called the police. She said the letter was completely ridiculous and that no piece of paper could possibly stop a grandmother from seeing her own grandchild. I pulled out my phone and called the police right in front of her, maintaining eye contact the entire time. She finally left before they arrived, but not before yelling loudly enough for other families to hear that we were keeping her from her granddaughter for absolutely no reason. Officer Kowalski responded to the call, along with another officer I didn't recognize. I showed them the cease and desist letter and explained about Linda photographing Maya without our permission, despite explicit instructions to stay away. Officer Kowalski said this was an absolutely clear violation of the cease and desist order and that we now had strong grounds for filing for a formal restraining order. He said Linda's behavior was escalating in a genuinely concerning pattern, and we should file for the restraining order immediately for our family's safety and peace of mind. We went directly from the park to Jennifer Lawson's office, even though it was Saturday. She came in specifically to meet with us after I called her cell phone. She said the pattern of escalating behavior was crystal clear: medication destruction, attempted unauthorized school pickup, violation of cease and desist, and now photographing Maya without permission in deliberate defiance of our boundaries. She said a judge would absolutely grant a restraining order based on this documented evidence. She filed all the necessary paperwork that afternoon, and we had a hearing scheduled for the following Thursday. The week leading up to the restraining order hearing was absolutely awful. Olivia barely ate or slept, despite the anti-anxiety medication. I could visibly see her depression worsening, even with the increased antidepressant dosage. Maya kept asking why we couldn't go to the park anymore, why we had to check out the windows before leaving the house, why Grandma Linda wasn't allowed to visit like other kids' grandmas. Explaining everything in terms a 3-year-old could understand felt nearly impossible. Dr. Laurent helped Olivia prepare mentally for the hearing, working through the anxiety and helping her organize her thoughts about what she wanted to say to the judge. Dr. Chen helped me manage my anger so I wouldn't lose my composure in the courtroom. We had all our documentation meticulously organized: medical records from 3 different doctors, text messages, photographs, police reports, the cease and desist letter, witness statements from Rachel and Mrs. Whitman. The restraining order hearing was held in family court on Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Linda arrived with Frank and a lawyer she'd retained, Douglas Freeman, from a mid-sized firm downtown with a decent reputation. Jennifer had warned us ahead of time that Linda hiring her own attorney meant she was taking this very seriously and would likely fight the restraining order aggressively. The judge, Honorable Catherine Novak, with 19 years on the bench, reviewed our petition and all the supporting evidence we'd submitted in advance. She asked Jennifer to summarize our case concisely. Jennifer walked through the timeline methodically and chronologically. The medication destruction documented by Dr. Kirkland, the attempted unauthorized school pickup documented by Mrs. Whitman, the cease and desist violation documented by Officer Kowalski, and the park photographing incident with witness testimony from other parents who'd heard Linda yelling. She presented the detailed letters from Dr. Laurent and Dr. Graves documenting the significant mental health impact on Olivia. Judge Novak asked Linda's attorney if he wanted to respond to our allegations. Douglas Freeman stood and argued that Linda was simply a loving grandmother who'd made some admittedly poor judgment calls, but posed absolutely no threat to anyone in our family. He said the medication incident was a misunderstanding where Linda genuinely thought she was helping our family grow. Judge Novak interrupted him directly and asked how destroying someone's prescription medication could possibly be considered helping them. Freeman stumbled over his words somewhat and said Linda had been concerned about potential long-term health effects of extended birth control use. Judge Novak asked pointedly if Linda had any medical training or education that would qualify her to make those kinds of medical determinations. Freeman admitted she did not have any medical credentials. The judge asked Linda directly if she understood she'd broken the law by destroying prescription medication. Linda said very quietly that she hadn't thought of it that way at the time. She'd just been trying to help us have another baby. Judge Novak's expression hardened noticeably. She said good intentions absolutely did not excuse illegal behavior or justify violating someone's fundamental bodily autonomy. She asked Linda directly if she'd apologize genuinely to Olivia for what she'd done. Linda said she'd tried to apologize multiple times, but that we wouldn't accept it or listen to her. Judge Novak asked what specifically she'd said in those apology attempts. Linda hesitated for several long seconds and then said she'd told us she was sorry we were so upset and hurt. The judge noted very clearly for the record that wasn't actually an apology for her actions, just an expression of regret that we had reacted negatively. She asked Linda if she truly understood why destroying someone's birth control was harmful and wrong. Linda said she understood we were very angry with her, but she still genuinely believed she'd done what was right for our family's future. Judge Novak said that response demonstrated Linda fundamentally didn't understand the severity of her actions or have any respect for our authority as Maya's parents and Olivia's bodily autonomy. The judge granted a full 2-year restraining order prohibiting Linda from contacting Olivia, me, or Maya, either directly or indirectly through third parties. She was legally ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from our home, both our workplaces, and Maya's preschool at all times. She was explicitly prohibited from taking any photographs of any of us and from posting anything about us on social media platforms. Judge Novak said the order could potentially be modified in the future if Linda successfully completed a court-ordered program on respecting boundaries and parental rights and could demonstrate genuine understanding of why her behavior had been harmful and illegal. Linda started crying audibly in the courtroom. Frank put his arm around her shoulders, and her lawyer made notes on his legal pad. As we left the courthouse, I could hear Linda saying to Frank that the judge was clearly biased against grandmothers, and the whole system was specifically designed to keep families apart. The relief I felt walking out of that courthouse was absolutely overwhelming and almost physical. We had real legal protection now. Linda couldn't show up at our house unannounced. She couldn't appear at Maya's school. She couldn't contact us or take pictures of our daughter. If she violated the order in any way, she'd face immediate criminal charges. Olivia was very quiet during the drive home, and when I asked if she was okay, she said she felt like she could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. She said just knowing Linda couldn't suddenly appear anywhere had lifted this constant crushing weight of anxiety she'd been carrying around. That night, we both slept better than we had since this entire nightmare began. Maya asked about Grandma Linda again at breakfast the next morning, and Olivia told her gently that Grandma was in a very long timeout because she'd broken some very important rules. Maya seemed to accept this explanation pretty easily and went back to eating her cereal. The restraining order violation happened less than 3 weeks later. We got home from grocery shopping on a Sunday afternoon to find a large package sitting on our front doorstep. There was no return address visible anywhere on the box, but inside was the expensive baby blanket, a greeting card that said, "For baby number 2," with a heart drawn on it, and a brand new box of prenatal vitamins. The card was signed, "Love always, Grandma Linda," in her distinctive handwriting. My hands were physically shaking as I carefully took photographs of everything before touching any of it. I called Officer Kowalski immediately, and he came to our house to collect the entire package as evidence. He said sending any gifts to our home was an absolutely clear violation of the restraining order, and he'd file a formal report immediately. Linda was arrested the very next day for violating a court-issued protective order. She was held overnight in jail and appeared before Judge Novak the following morning for a violation hearing. The judge was clearly not pleased at all. She told Linda directly that she'd been given an extremely clear court order and had chosen to violate it within just weeks. She added an additional 6 months to the restraining order's duration and ordered Linda to complete mandatory counseling specifically focused on boundaries and respecting court orders. Linda's lawyer tried to argue that sending a gift wasn't really contact, and his client had just been expressing love for her family. Judge Novak shut that argument down immediately, saying the restraining order explicitly prohibited any contact whatsoever, direct or indirect, and sending packages to their home absolutely qualified as prohibited contact. She warned Linda very sternly that any future violations would result in significantly more serious consequences, including potential jail time. Rachel called Olivia the day after Linda's arrest to say their mother had had what appeared to be a complete emotional breakdown and was in some kind of crisis state. Olivia felt a sharp pang of guilt until Dr. Laurent firmly reminded her that Linda's mental health was absolutely not Olivia's responsibility, especially considering how much damage Linda had caused to Olivia's own mental health. Rachel said she'd tried repeatedly to convince their mother to just comply with the court orders and work on herself in therapy, but Linda stubbornly refused to admit she'd done anything genuinely wrong. She kept doubling down on her position, insisting she was the real victim here, telling absolutely anyone who would listen that her daughter had turned against her over nothing. Rachel said she'd completely stopped trying to reason with their mother and was now just focusing on maintaining her own relationship with Olivia and supporting her however she could. Olivia cried and thanked her sister genuinely for choosing to see and support the truth, even when it was difficult and uncomfortable. The mandatory counseling program Linda was court-ordered to complete was run by Dr. Alan Sheffield, a family therapist with extensive experience in boundary violations and enmeshment issues. Jennifer knew him professionally and said he was excellent at cutting through denial and forcing people to genuinely face their problematic behavior patterns. Linda attended her first mandatory session but refused to engage meaningfully with the therapeutic process. Dr. Sheffield filed an official report with the court stating that Linda was physically present in the room but actively resistant to any real therapeutic work. She'd insisted throughout the entire session that she was the actual victim of overreactive children and a biased legal system that didn't understand family love. Judge Novak extended Linda's mandatory counseling requirement from 3 months to 6 months and warned explicitly that if she didn't start participating genuinely and meaningfully, she'd face contempt of court charges. Somewhere around month 5 of the restraining order, Linda apparently started to crack under the combined pressure. According to Rachel, who maintained very limited contact with their mother, Linda had been gradually dropped by several longtime friends who'd grown exhausted hearing her constant victim narrative. Her pastor, Reverend Bellamy, had apparently had an extremely frank conversation with her about taking genuine responsibility for her actions and their consequences. Frank had actually threatened to move out and possibly file for separation if she didn't start dealing with reality and working on herself. The combination of mounting social consequences, serious legal consequences, and her husband's ultimatum seemed to finally shake something loose in her rigid thinking. Dr. Sheffield reported to the court that Linda was finally beginning to show some genuine engagement in the therapeutic process and some very early signs of actually understanding why her behavior had been harmful and wrong. He cautioned that she still had an extremely long way to go, but that there was finally some measurable movement in a positive direction. 9 months after the original medication incident, we received a letter forwarded through Jennifer Lawson's office for safety reasons. It was from Linda, written as assigned homework from her therapy sessions with Dr. Sheffield. The letter acknowledged clearly that she'd destroyed Olivia's medication without any permission, and that her action was absolutely wrong and harmful. She said she was beginning to understand now that what she'd done was a serious violation of Olivia's autonomy and fundamental bodily rights. She said she'd been operating from a deeply flawed place of believing she always knew what was best for everyone and hadn't truly respected that Olivia and I were fully capable adults, making our own informed decisions. She apologized for the pain and trauma she'd caused and for the significant mental health impact on Olivia that required medical intervention. She said she wasn't asking for anything in return. She just wanted us to know she was actively working on understanding her harmful behavior patterns and genuinely trying to change. The letter was noticeably and dramatically different from all her previous communications. There was no blame shifting whatsoever, no playing victim, no excuses or justifications for her actions. Olivia read that letter probably 15 times over several days, analyzing every word and phrase. She took it to Dr. Laurent to process thoroughly. Dr. Laurent said the letter definitely showed real progress and growth, but she strongly cautioned that one well-written letter didn't automatically mean Linda had fundamentally changed as a person. She said Olivia absolutely needed to protect herself and Maya first and foremost, and if Olivia was even remotely open to eventual reconciliation down the road, it needed to happen extremely slowly, with very firm boundaries maintained and ongoing proof of genuinely changed behavior over time. Olivia said honestly, she didn't know if she wanted any reconciliation or not. Part of her genuinely missed her mother despite absolutely everything that had happened. Part of her recognized she'd actually been significantly healthier and calmer during these months of zero contact than she'd been in years. I told her whatever she ultimately decided, I'd support her completely and unconditionally, but that we absolutely wouldn't rush into anything or put Maya at any risk whatsoever. The restraining order was set to expire in 16 months, assuming Linda successfully completed all her court-ordered therapy requirements. Dr. Sheffield's progress reports showed continued steady improvement. Linda had apparently started to genuinely grasp difficult concepts like enmeshment, respect for autonomy, and appropriate grandmother boundaries versus overstepping into parenting roles. She'd acknowledged in therapy sessions that she'd spent Olivia's entire childhood essentially grooming her to defer to Linda's judgment about everything, and that this pattern had been deeply harmful to Olivia's development. She'd recognized that her desperate need for another grandchild was rooted primarily in her own need to feel needed and relevant, rather than in what was actually best for our family. These therapeutic insights, according to Dr. Sheffield's professional assessment, suggested genuine, meaningful work was happening. But he cautioned the court very clearly that knowing something intellectually and actually changing deeply ingrained behavior patterns were two completely different things. We didn't respond to Linda's letter immediately. We sat with it for several weeks, discussing it thoroughly in our respective therapy sessions, talking extensively about what we actually wanted and what we could reasonably expect going forward. Eventually, Olivia wrote back through Jennifer's office. She thanked Linda sincerely for the letter and acknowledged that it seemed to show genuine progress and growth. She said she needed significantly more time and much more evidence of sustained behavioral change before she'd even consider any kind of contact or relationship. She said Maya's well-being and her own mental health had to remain the absolute top priorities. She said if Linda continued consistently with therapy and could demonstrate over substantial time that she truly understood and would respect boundaries, Olivia might potentially be open to very limited supervised contact in the distant future. But she made absolutely crystal clear that all trust had been completely destroyed and would take many years to rebuild, if it even could be rebuilt at all. 14 months after the medication incident, Olivia's mental health had finally stabilized back to baseline. The increased therapy frequency and medication adjustments had successfully helped her through the acute crisis period. Dr. Graves had gradually reduced her medications back to her normal maintenance levels. Dr. Laurent had moved their sessions back to monthly check-ins for ongoing support. Olivia said she actually felt stronger and more confident than she had in many years, that having such firm boundaries with her mother had paradoxically freed her to focus on her own healing and on our immediate family. We'd created a life essentially without Linda's constant interference and manipulation, and it was remarkably peaceful. Maya was absolutely thriving in preschool, happy and well-adjusted and secure. Our marriage had actually grown significantly stronger through facing this major crisis together as a unified team. We'd learned to communicate better, to actively support each other through genuinely hard things, and to make difficult decisions together. When the restraining order was finally approaching its expiration date, Jennifer contacted us to discuss our available options going forward. We could petition the court to extend it indefinitely, or we could let it expire naturally and see how Linda behaved without the legal requirement hanging over her. Dr. Laurent, Dr. Chen, and even Dr. Sheffield, through an official court report, all suggested that letting it expire might be appropriate given Linda's documented progress in therapy, but that we should absolutely maintain extremely strict personal boundaries regardless of the legal status. We decided together to let the restraining order expire as scheduled, but to make absolutely clear to Linda that the legal protection ending didn't mean she had automatic access to us or Maya. We drafted another careful letter, this time without attorney letterhead to make it feel slightly less adversarial, stating that while the restraining order was ending, our personal boundaries remained completely firm and non-negotiable. Any contact would happen entirely on our terms, would be supervised, and could be immediately revoked if she violated our trust in any way. Linda sent a very brief response thanking us for the letter and saying she understood completely. She said she'd continue with therapy voluntarily and would wait patiently for us to reach out if and when we felt ready. That restraint and respect for our timeline felt genuinely meaningful and significant. The old Linda would have immediately started pushing aggressively for visits, making demands, playing the victim if we didn't respond fast enough to satisfy her. This newer version of Linda seemed to actually understand that she'd burned the bridge almost completely, and that we would decide if and when any rebuilding might start. Several more months passed quietly. We occasionally got brief updates through Rachel. Linda was still actively in therapy completely by her own choice, now that the court requirement had ended. She'd apparently joined a support group specifically for people working on boundary issues and enmeshment patterns. She'd written letters to Rachel and Austin apologizing for her role in various family dysfunctions over the years. 18 months after the medication incident, Olivia decided she wanted to try one single supervised meeting with her mother in Dr. Sheffield's office. Just the two of them with the therapist present as a neutral mediator. No promises whatsoever of ongoing contact, just one carefully structured conversation to see if Linda's changes were actually real and sustainable long-term. I supported her decision completely while also making absolutely sure she knew she could change her mind at literally any point. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Olivia was noticeably nervous all morning, changing clothes multiple times, barely able to eat anything. I drove her to Dr. Sheffield's office and waited in the parking lot in case she needed to leave early or wanted support. The session lasted approximately 90 minutes. When Olivia finally came out, she was crying, but these tears looked somehow different than before, softer and less anguished somehow. She got in the car and told me her mother had apologized again, this time face-to-face with absolutely no excuses or justifications whatsoever. Linda had acknowledged the specific harms she'd caused and taken complete full responsibility for her actions. She'd said she understood if Olivia never forgave her, but wanted Olivia to know she was genuinely committed to being different and better. Dr. Sheffield had carefully facilitated the entire conversation, stopping Linda immediately anytime she started to slip into making excuses or shifting blame, and Linda had corrected herself each time it happened. Olivia said it felt absolutely surreal hearing her mother talk about concepts like boundaries and autonomy and respect, things Linda had spent Olivia's entire childhood systematically violating. But it also felt like maybe, just possibly, there was a version of her mother who could exist in the world without needing to control absolutely everything and everyone around her. If you made it this far, hit like, you've earned it.